Soojin's world came crashing down on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. She had just finished her morning coffee when her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. At first, she ignored them, assuming it was just another busy day at work. But as the buzzing continued, a sense of unease crept over her. And if you want a handsome CEO in your life and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. With trembling fingers, she unlocked her phone. The moment she saw the first message, her heart stopped. There, on her screen, was an intimate photo of herself, one she had shared only with her husband, Sungmin. The photo was accompanied by lewd comments and shares from strangers on social media. Soojin's mind raced as she scrolled through the notifications, each one feeling like a dagger to her heart. How could this be happening? She frantically searched for an explanation, hoping against hope that this was some cruel joke or a terrible mistake. But as she delved deeper, the horrifying truth became clear. Sungmin, the man she had trusted with her heart and her most vulnerable moments, had betrayed her in the most profound way possible. He had shared not just one, but several intimate photos of her on various social media platforms. The shock of the discovery left Soojin paralyzed. She sat on her couch, phone clutched in her hand, as waves of emotion washed over her. Betrayal, humiliation, anger, and fear battled for dominance in her mind. How could Sungmin do this to her? What had she done to deserve such a cruel violation of her trust? As the reality of the situation sank in, Soojin's paralysis gave way to panic. She frantically tried to contact Sungmin, but her calls went straight to voicemail. With shaking hands, she began the arduous process of reporting the photos and trying to get them taken down. But she knew the damage was already done. The images were out there, seen by countless strangers, shared and commented on without her consent. The next few hours passed in a blur of tears and frantic phone calls. Soojin reached out to her closest friend, Min Seo, who rushed over to provide support. Together, they worked on damage control, but the task seemed insurmountable. The photos were spreading faster than they could contain them. As night fell, Soojin found herself facing another daunting challenge, going to work the next day. The thought of facing her colleagues, of potentially being recognized or judged, filled her with dread. But she knew she couldn't hide forever. With Min Seo's encouragement, she decided to face the world head-on, no matter how difficult it might be. The following morning, Soojin arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to avoid as many people as possible. But as she stepped out of the elevator, she could feel the weight of curious gazes upon her. The usual morning chatter seemed to die down as she walked to her desk, replaced by hushed whispers and furtive glances. Soojin tried to focus on her work, but the constant murmur of voices around her made concentration impossible. She could hear snippets of conversations, her name mentioned in hushed tones. The pressure of the situation began to build, threatening to overwhelm her. In the middle of a particularly tense moment, when Soojin felt like she might break down, a commanding voice cut through the office chatter. "Everyone, back to work," it said firmly. Soojin looked up to see Jae-hyuk, the company's CEO, standing at the entrance of the open office space. His presence seemed to dispel some of the tension, and gradually, the office returned to its normal buzz of activity. Jae-hyuk's intervention provided a brief respite, but as the day wore on, the pressure became unbearable. Soojin could feel the weight of judgment in every glance, every whispered conversation. By lunchtime, she felt like she was suffocating. Unable to face the prospect of the communal break room, she retreated to a secluded corner of the office building. It was there that Jae-hyuk found her, curled up in a chair, trying to make herself as small as possible. He approached cautiously, his usually confident demeanor softened by concern. "Soojin," he said gently, "may I join you?" Soojin looked up, surprise momentarily replacing the anguish on her face. She nodded silently, and Jae-hyuk took a seat beside her. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the situation hanging between them. Finally, Jae-hyuk spoke. "I want you to know that what's happening to you is not your fault," he said, his voice firm but kind. You're the victim here, and you have my full support." Soojin felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had expected judgment or, at best, indifference from her colleagues. This offer of support, especially from the CEO, was unexpected and overwhelming. Jae-hyuk continued, "I've instructed HR to take immediate action against anyone in the company who spreads or discusses the photos. Your privacy and dignity will be respected here." He paused, then added, "And if you need any help outside of work, legal assistance, counseling, anything, please don't hesitate to ask. We're here to support you." His words were like a lifeline to Soojin, who had been drowning in a sea of humiliation and despair. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Someone believed in her. Someone was willing to stand by her side. As Jae-hyuk got up to leave, he placed a reassuring hand on Soojin's shoulder. "You're stronger than this, Soojin. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." With that, he left, leaving Soojin to process this unexpected turn of events. The rest of the day passed in a haze for Soojin. The weight of her situation still pressed down on her, but Jae-hyuk's support had given her a foundation to stand on. As she packed up her things at the end of the day, she found a business card on her desk with a handwritten note from Jae-hyuk, providing his personal contact information and reiterating his offer of support. That night, as Soojin lay in bed, her mind raced with the events of the past 2 days. The betrayal of her husband still cut deep, and the fear of what the future held loomed large. But amidst the turmoil, a small spark of determination had ignited. With the unexpected support of Jae-hyuk and the unwavering presence of Min Se-yo, Soojin made a decision. She wouldn't let this destroy her. Somehow, someway, she would find a way through this nightmare and reclaim her life. As she drifted off to sleep, Soojin held on to that spark of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt like she might have the strength to face them. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer walking it alone. The following days were a blur for Soojin. She found herself torn between the desire to hide away from the world and the need to face her new reality head-on. Jae-hyuk's offer of support lingered in her mind, a lifeline she was hesitant to grasp. One morning, as Soojin sat at her desk, trying to focus on her work despite the occasional whispers and glances, she received an email from Jae-hyuk. He was requesting a meeting with her that afternoon. Her heart raced as she read the message, a mix of anxiety and curiosity washing over her. When the time came, Soojin made her way to Jae-hyuk's office, her steps hesitant. As she entered, she found not only Jae-hyuk but also a small group of people she didn't recognize. Jae-hyuk introduced them as a team of lawyers specializing in privacy and defamation cases. "Soojin," Jae-hyuk began, his tone serious but kind, "I know you're going through a difficult time. I've assembled this team to help you navigate the legal aspects of your situation. They're here to explain your options and rights." For the next hour, Soojin listened as the lawyers outlined potential courses of action. They explained the laws surrounding invasion of privacy, the distribution of intimate images without consent, and the possible legal recourse against her husband. It was overwhelming, but for the first time since the nightmare began, Soojin felt a sense of control returning. As the meeting concluded, Jae-hyuk pulled Soojin aside. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said softly. "Take some time to think it over. Remember, this support is here if you want it." Soojin nodded, grateful, but still uncertain. She left the office with a stack of business cards and a whirlwind of information swirling in her mind. That evening, Soojin found herself at Min Se-yo's apartment, sprawled on the couch with a glass of wine in hand. Min Se-yo listened patiently as Soojin recounted the meeting with Jae-hyuk and the lawyers. "It's a lot to take in," Min Se-yo said, refilling their glasses. "But Soojin, this could be a real opportunity. Jae-hyuk seems genuinely willing to help." Soojin sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "I know, but why? Why would he go to all this trouble for me? I'm just another employee." Min Se-yo leaned forward, her expression serious. "Maybe because he's a decent human being? Or maybe he sees something in you worth fighting for. Either way, I think you should accept his help." As the night wore on, Soojin and Minaseo talked through the pros and cons of accepting Jae-hyuk's offer. Minaseo's unwavering support and practical advice helped Soojin sort through her tangled emotions. "You know," Minaseo said as they were cleaning up, "I've known you for years, Soojin. You're one of the strongest people I know. Don't let this situation make you doubt yourself." Soojin felt a lump form in her throat at her friend's words. "I don't feel very strong right now," she admitted. Minaseo pulled her into a tight hug. "That's okay. That's what friends are for. We'll be strong for you until you can be strong for yourself again." The next morning, Soojin arrived at work with a newfound determination. She made her way to Jae-hyuk's office, knocking on the door with a steady hand. "Come in," Jae-hyuk called out. Soojin entered, meeting Jae-hyuk's questioning gaze. "I've decided to accept your offer of help," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I want to fight this." A smile spread across Jae-hyuk's face. "I'm glad to hear that, Soojin. We'll start right away." Over the next few weeks, Soojin found herself in a whirlwind of legal meetings and strategy sessions. The lawyers worked tirelessly to build a case against her husband, gathering evidence and preparing for potential court proceedings. Throughout it all, Jae-hyuk remained a constant presence. He attended many of the meetings, offering insights and support. Soojin found herself increasingly grateful for his involvement, even as she struggled to understand his motivations. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting, Jae-hyuk invited Soojin to join him for a late dinner. As they sat in a quiet corner of a nearby restaurant, Soojin finally voiced the question that had been nagging at her. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for answers. Jae-hyuk was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because I've seen how hard you work, how dedicated you are. You don't deserve what's happened to you, and I want to help make it right." His words hung in the air between them, and Soojin felt a wave of emotion wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of everything that had happened. To her surprise, instead of crushing her, it felt like a burden shared. As they continued their meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Soojin found herself laughing at Jae-hyuk's dry humor, momentarily forgetting the stress of her situation. It was a small reprieve, but a welcome one. When they parted ways that night, Soojin felt a shift in her perspective. The road ahead was still daunting, but she no longer felt like she was facing it alone. With Minaseo's unwavering friendship, Jae-hyuk's support, and her own growing determination, she felt ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. As she walked home under the city lights, Soojin allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't okay yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt like she might be okay eventually. And for now, that was enough. As the legal team continued to build their case, Soojin found herself spending more time with Jae-hyuk. Their meetings, initially strictly professional, began to take on a more personal tone. One evening, after a particularly intense strategy session, Jae-hyuk suggested they take a walk to clear their heads. They strolled through a nearby park, the setting sun casting long shadows across the path. For a while, they walked in comfortable silence, the stress of the day slowly ebbing away. Then, unexpectedly, Jae-hyuk began to speak. "You know, Soojin," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I admire how you're handling all of this. It can't be easy." Soojin glanced at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. "It's not," she admitted, "but I'm trying to stay strong." Jae-hyuk nodded, then took a deep breath. "I understand more than you might think. A few years ago, I went through something similar." Soojin stopped walking, turning to face him. "What do you mean?" Jae-hyuk's eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of pain in them. "My ex-wife, she leaked some private information about me to the press. It wasn't photos, but it was personal. Very personal. For a while, I thought my career was over." Soojin listened, stunned by this revelation. The polished, confident CEO she knew seemed a far cry from the vulnerable man he was describing. "How did you get through it?" she asked softly. A small smile tugged at Jae-hyuk's lips. One day at a time. I had good people around me who supported me, and I refused to let it define me. It was hard, but eventually I came out stronger. As they resumed walking, Soojin felt a shift in her perception of Jae-hyuk. His willingness to share his own pain, to make himself vulnerable, created a new connection between them. She found herself opening up in return, sharing fears and insecurities she had been holding back. Their conversation continued long into the evening, touching on topics both light and deep. By the time they parted ways, Soojin felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer night. The next day, Soojin met Min-seo for their weekly lunch date. As they settled into their favorite cafe, Min-seo immediately noticed a change in her friend. "You seem different today," Min-seo observed, stirring her iced coffee. "More relaxed?" Soojin couldn't help the small smile that crept onto her face. She recounted her conversation with Jae-hyuk, watching as Min-seo's eyebrows rose higher with each detail. "Wow," Min-seo said when Soojin finished. "That's unexpected. But in a good way, I think. How do you feel about it?" Soojin paused, considering the question. "I feel seen," she said finally. "Like he understands what I'm going through in a way no one else has." Min-seo nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Just be careful, okay? I know Jae-hyuk has been great, but he's still your boss. And you're in a vulnerable position right now." Soojin appreciated her friend's concern, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special developing between her and Jae-hyuk. Still, she knew Min-seo had a point. She needed to focus on healing and fighting her legal battle. Whatever was happening with Jae-hyuk would have to wait. As the weeks passed, Soojin found herself growing stronger. The legal team made progress on her case, and support from both Jae-hyuk and Min-seo helped her regain her confidence. She began to hold her head high at work, meeting curious gazes with a steady look of her own. One day, as Soojin was leaving a meeting with the legal team, Jae-hyuk pulled her aside. "There's a company event coming up next week," he said. "I think it would be good for you to attend. Show everyone that you're not hiding." Soojin felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted. Jae-hyuk's expression softened. "You're stronger than you think, Soojin. But if it would help, I'd be happy to accompany you. As moral support." The offer hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Soojin found herself nodding before she had fully processed the implications. "Okay," she said. "I'll go." As Jae-hyuk smiled and walked away, Soojin felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The event would be a test, a chance to face her colleagues head-on. But more than that, it would be an opportunity to explore whatever was developing between her and Jae-hyuk. That night, as Soojin lay in bed, her mind raced with thoughts of the upcoming event. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be whispers, judgmental looks, maybe even outright hostility. But for the first time since her ordeal began, she felt ready to face it all. She thought about how far she had come, from the broken, humiliated woman she had been to the person she was becoming. She wasn't fully healed, not yet, but she was healing. And with Jae-hyuk by her side and Min-seo in her corner, she felt like she could take on anything. As she drifted off to sleep, Soojin allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope for the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with her head held high. She was reclaiming her life, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, she was on the verge of something new and beautiful with Jae-hyuk. The company event loomed on the horizon, a milestone in Soojin's journey of recovery. It represented not just a professional challenge, but a personal one as well. As she closed her eyes, Soojin made a promise to herself. She would walk into that event not as a victim, but as a survivor. And whatever happened, she would face it with courage and grace. The night of the company event arrived, and Soojin found herself standing in front of her mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. She had chosen a sleek black dress, professional yet elegant. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. She looked composed, confident, everything she didn't quite feel inside. A soft knock on her apartment door startled her out of her reverie. She opened it to find Jae-hyuk standing there, looking sharp in a well-tailored suit. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice sincere. Soo-jin felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You clean up pretty well yourself." As they made their way to the event venue, Soo-jin's nerves began to resurface. Jae-hyuk seemed to sense her unease and placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Remember," he said softly, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. Hold your head high." Soo-jin took a deep breath and nodded, drawing strength from his words and presence. The moment they entered the crowded ballroom, Soo-jin felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The usual chatter seemed to dim for a moment as people noticed her arrival. She could hear the whispers starting, see the furtive glances and raised eyebrows. But before the weight of it all could crush her, Jae-hyuk's hand found the small of her back, guiding her further into the room. His touch was light but grounding, reminding her that she wasn't alone. As they made their way through the crowd, Jae-hyuk began introducing Soo-jin to various executives and clients. His manner was casual yet respectful, treating her as a valued colleague rather than a scandalous topic of gossip. "This is Soo-jin," he would say, "one of our most talented project managers. She's been instrumental in the success of our recent initiatives." With each introduction, Soo-jin felt a little of her confidence return. She engaged in conversations, her voice growing stronger as the night went on. Some people were clearly uncomfortable, their smiles tight and eyes averted. But others seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking questions about her projects and ideas. As the evening progressed, Soo-jin found herself in a conversation with a senior executive from a partner company. The man, after a few drinks, seemed to forget his filter. "So," he said, leaning in close, "you're the one from those photos, right? Must have been quite the scandal." Soo-jin felt her breath catch in her throat, the familiar feeling of shame threatening to overwhelm her. But before she could respond, Jae-hyuk was there, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. "I believe," Jae-hyuk said, his voice cool and authoritative, "that you were asking about Soo-jin's excellent work on the Kim project. It's quite impressive, isn't it?" The executive blinked, taken aback by Jae-hyuk's pointed redirect. He mumbled an apology and quickly excused himself. As he walked away, Soo-jin turned to Jae-hyuk, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. Jae-hyuk's expression softened as he met her gaze. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "You deserve to be respected for your work and your character, not judged for something that was done to you." In that moment, looking into Jae-hyuk's eyes, Soo-jin felt something shift inside her. The warmth and admiration she had been feeling for him crystallized into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. As if sensing the change, Jae-hyuk's hand found hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. The touch sent a jolt through Soo-jin, and she found herself wanting to lean into him, to seek comfort in his presence. But even as the desire washed over her, fear followed close behind. The memory of her ex-husband's betrayal was still raw, the wound still fresh. Could she really trust her heart again so soon? Jae-hyuk seemed to sense her internal struggle. He led her to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from prying eyes and ears. "Soo-jin," he said softly, "I want you to know that I'm here for you, in whatever capacity you need. There's no pressure, no expectations. Just know that you're not alone in this." His words, so genuine and understanding, brought tears to Soo-jin's eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to ruin her makeup or show vulnerability in such a public setting. I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything that's happened, I'm still trying to put myself back together." Jae-hyuk nodded, his expression understanding. "I know," he said. "And that's okay. Healing takes time. Just know that when you are ready, if you ever are, I'll be here." As they rejoined the party, Soo-jin felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Gratitude for Jae-hyuk's support, fear of opening her heart again, and a tentative hope for what the future might hold. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and polite smiles. By the time they left, Soo-jin was exhausted but proud. She had faced her colleagues and their judgment head-on, and she had survived. As Jae-hyuk walked her to her door, Soo-jin felt a surge of courage. Standing on her tiptoes, she placed a soft kiss on his cheek. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Jae-hyuk's smile was warm and genuine. "Good night, Soo-jin," he said softly. "You were amazing tonight." As she closed the door behind her, Soo-jin leaned against it, her heart racing. She had taken a small step tonight, both professionally and personally. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about what it might bring. In the days following the company event, Soo-jin found herself in a whirlwind of emotions. The success of the evening had boosted her confidence, but it had also opened up a new realm of complications. Her growing feelings for Jae-hyuk were at the forefront of her mind, battling with her lingering fears and insecurities. One morning, as Soo-jin sat in a meeting with the legal team, she found it hard to concentrate. The lawyers were discussing the progress of her case, but her thoughts kept drifting to Jae-hyuk. She was grateful for his support, but a part of her wondered if there was more to it. Was she reading too much into his kindness? Was she ready for any kind of romantic involvement? As the meeting concluded, Jae-hyuk approached her. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. Soo-jin managed a small smile. "I'm okay," she replied. "It's just a lot to process." Jae-hyuk nodded understandingly. "Why don't we grab lunch later? We can discuss the case or anything else you want to talk about." The invitation hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Soo-jin found herself nodding, even as her heart raced with anticipation and fear. Later that day, as they sat in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe, Soo-jin struggled to find the right words. Jae-hyuk waited patiently, his presence a comforting constant. I want to thank you again," Soo-jin finally said, "for everything you've done. But I'm also confused." Jae-hyuk's expression softened. "About what?" Soo-jin took a deep breath. "About us. About what this is. I'm grateful for your support, but I can't help feeling that there's more to it. And that scares me." Jae-hyuk was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Soo-jin," he began, "I won't deny that I care for you, more than just as an employee or a friend. But I also understand that you're going through a difficult time. The last thing I want to do is add to your stress or pressure you in any way." His honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. Soo-jin felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "After what happened with my ex-husband, I'm not sure I can trust my judgment anymore." Jae-hyuk reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "That's completely understandable," he said. "You've been through a traumatic experience. It's okay to take time to heal. I'm not going anywhere." His words were comforting, but they also highlighted the complexity of their situation. Soo-jin was acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. He was still her boss, after all. And yet, she couldn't deny the connection she felt with him. As they finished their lunch and headed back to the office, Soo-jin felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. She was grateful for Jae-hyuk's understanding, but she also knew that her feelings for him weren't going to simply disappear. That evening, Soo-jin met with Min Se-oh for their regular catch-up. As they settled into Min Se-oh's cozy apartment, Soo-jin found herself pouring out everything that had happened. Min Se-oh listened attentively, her brow furrowed in concern. When Soo-jin finished, Min Se-oh was quiet for a moment, considering her response. "Soo-jin," she said finally, "I can see how much Jae-hyuk means to you. And it's clear he cares about you too. But you're right to be cautious. You've been through a lot, and it's important that you take the time you need to heal." Soo-jin nodded, grateful for her friend's balanced perspective. That being said, Min Se-oh continued, a small smile playing on her lips. "I've seen the way you light up when you talk about him. I haven't seen you this animated in a long time. Maybe it's worth exploring when you feel ready." Soo-jin felt a flutter in her chest at Min Se-oh's words. "But what if I'm making a mistake?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if I'm just vulnerable and latching onto the first person who's shown me kindness? Minaseo reached out, squeezing Sujin's hand. That's a valid concern, she said. But from what you've told me, Jae-hyuk seems to genuinely care about your well-being. He's not pushing you, he's supporting you. That's a good sign. As the evening wore on, Sujin and Minaseo continued to talk, dissecting every interaction with Jae-hyuk, weighing the pros and cons of pursuing a relationship. By the time Sujin left, she felt more centered, more sure of herself. The next few weeks were a delicate dance for Sujin and Jae-hyuk. They continued to work closely on her case, their interactions professional but tinged with an undercurrent of unspoken emotions. Sujin found herself looking forward to their meetings, cherishing the moments when their hands would accidentally brush or when Jae-hyuk's gaze would linger on her a moment too long. As the date for the first court hearing approached, Sujin's anxiety began to spike. The prospect of facing her ex-husband, of having her private life scrutinized in a public forum, was daunting. But through it all, Jae-hyuk remained a steady presence, offering support without pressure. One evening, as they were leaving a particularly intense meeting with the lawyers, Jae-hyuk pulled Sujin aside. "You're doing great," he said softly. "I know this isn't easy, but you're handling it with such grace and strength." Sujin felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. In that moment, looking into his eyes, she made a decision. She wasn't ready for a relationship, not yet. But she was ready to start opening her heart again, to allow herself to feel something other than fear and pain. "Jae-hyuk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for everything. I'm not ready for anything serious right now, but I want you to know that you mean a lot to me. And when I am ready, I hope you'll still be here." Jae-hyuk's smile was soft and understanding. "I'll be here, Sujin, for as long as you need." As they parted ways that evening, Sujin felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead was still uncertain, fraught with legal battles and emotional hurdles. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Hope for justice, hope for healing, and maybe, just maybe, hope for love. The day of the first court hearing arrived, bringing with it a storm of emotions for Sujin. She woke up early, her stomach in knots, the reality of what she was about to face weighing heavily on her. As she dressed in a conservative suit, carefully applying her makeup like armor, she tried to draw strength from the support system she had built over the past few months. Jae-hyuk had arranged for a company car to pick her up, insisting that she shouldn't have to worry about navigating traffic on such a stressful day. As Sujin slid into the back seat, she found a small, elegantly wrapped package waiting for her. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny, perfectly formed lotus flower. A note accompanied the gift. "Like the lotus, you rise from the mud to bloom. Your strength is an inspiration. I'll be there with you today." Jae-hyuk, Sujin felt tears prick her eyes as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. The gesture touched her deeply, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. At the courthouse, Sujin was met by her legal team and, to her surprise, Jae-hyuk himself. He stood slightly apart from the lawyers, his presence a silent pillar of support. When their eyes met, he gave her a reassuring nod, and Sujin felt a surge of courage. As they entered the courtroom, Sujin caught her first glimpse of her ex-husband in months. Sungmin sat on the opposite side, his face a mask of indifference. The sight of him sent a jolt of anger and pain through Sujin, but she forced herself to look away, focusing instead on her lawyer's calm, professional demeanor. The proceedings began, and Sujin listened as her lawyer presented their case, detailing the violation of privacy and the emotional distress caused by Sungmin's actions. It was surreal to hear her personal trauma laid out in such clinical terms, but Sujin drew strength from the knowledge that she was fighting back, reclaiming her narrative. When it came time for Sujin to give her testimony, she felt a moment of panic. But as she took the stand, her eyes found Jae-hyuk in the gallery. His steady gaze grounded her, and she took a deep breath before beginning to speak. "What happened to me?" Sujin began, her voice initially soft but growing stronger with each word. was a betrayal of the deepest kind. The man I had trusted with my heart, my body, and my future chose to violate that trust in the most public and humiliating way possible. As she continued her testimony, Sujin felt a shift within herself. The words flowed from her, not just recounting the events, but expressing the profound impact they had on her life. She spoke of the shame, the fear, and the anger she had experienced. But she also spoke of her determination to not let this define her, to fight back and reclaim her dignity. "What was done to me was wrong," she concluded, her voice steady and clear. "It was a violation not just of my privacy, but of my fundamental right to trust and feel safe in a relationship. I'm here today not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever felt powerless in the face of such a betrayal. This has to stop." As Sujin stepped down from the witness stand, she felt a curious mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had faced her fear, had looked her ex-husband in the eye, and spoken her truth. Whatever the outcome of the trial, she knew she had taken a crucial step in her healing process. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal arguments and counter-arguments. By the time the judge adjourned the hearing, setting a date for the next session, Sujin felt drained but oddly empowered. As they left the courthouse, Jae-hyuk fell into step beside her. "You were incredible in there," he said softly. "The way you spoke, you touched everyone in that room." "I'm so proud of you, Sujin." His words warmed her, and Sujin found herself reaching for his hand. It was a small gesture, but loaded with meaning. Jae-hyuk squeezed her hand gently, offering silent support and understanding. That evening, as Sujin sat in her apartment, reflecting on the events of the day, she felt a subtle shift in her perspective. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time, she truly believed she could win this fight. More than that, she realized that regardless of the legal outcome, she had already won a crucial battle, the one for her own self-worth. As she twirled the lotus charm on her bracelet, Sujin made a promise to herself. She would continue to rise above this, to bloom despite the mud that had threatened to drag her down. And perhaps, when this was all over, she would allow herself to explore the connection she felt with Jae-hyuk, to see if something beautiful could grow from the ashes of her past. With that thought, Sujin felt a small smile tug at her lips. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she would rest, knowing that she had taken a significant step towards reclaiming her life and her future. In the days following the first court hearing, Sujin found herself in a strange state of limbo. The adrenaline of testifying had worn off, leaving her feeling both empowered and exhausted. As she tried to navigate her daily life, she found her thoughts constantly drifting between the ongoing legal battle and her evolving feelings for Jae-hyuk. One evening, as Sujin was working late at the office, she heard a soft knock on her door. Looking up, she saw Jae-hyuk standing there, a concerned expression on his face. "You're here late," he said, stepping into her office. "Ice. How are you holding up?" Sujin sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm managing," she replied honestly. "It's just a lot to process." Jae-hyuk nodded understandingly. "Why don't we take a break? There's a nice view from the rooftop garden. Some fresh air might do good." Grateful for the distraction, Sujin agreed. As they stood side by side on the rooftop, looking out over the twinkling city lights, a comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Jae-hyuk spoke. "You know, Sujin, what you did in that courtroom, it was incredibly brave. You shouldn't let your past define you." Sujin turned to look at him, struck by the sincerity in his voice. "It's hard not to," she admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still that person, scared, humiliated, betrayed." Jae-hyuk's gaze softened. "But you're not," he said gently. "You're so much more than what happened to you. You're strong, resilient, brilliant. Don't let anyone, especially your ex-husband, make you forget that." His words touched something deep within Sujin. For so long, she had been struggling to separate herself from the victim she had become. Hearing Jae-hyuk articulate her worth so clearly was both comforting and eye-opening. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me, even when I struggled to believe in myself." Jae-hyuk reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Always," he replied. "You're not alone in this, Soo-jin. Not anymore." As they stood there, hand in hand, Soo-jin felt a shift within herself. The fear and uncertainty that had been holding her back began to loosen their grip. She realized that she had been so focused on the pain of her past that she had been hesitant to embrace the possibility of a future that could include Jae-hyuk. "Jae-hyuk," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm ready to stop letting my past control me, to start looking forward instead of back." Jae-hyuk's eyes lit up with understanding and hope. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone careful. "There's no rush, Soo-jin. I meant what I said before. I'll be here, no matter how long it takes." Soo-jin nodded, feeling more certain with each passing moment. "I'm sure," she said. "I can't promise it will be easy. I still have a lot to work through. But I want to try. With you." The smile that spread across Jae-hyuk's face was radiant. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned in. Their lips met in a soft, tender kiss, a promise of new beginnings. As they parted, Soo-jin felt a warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly hopeful about the future. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the buzz of Soo-jin's phone. As she reached for it, her expression changed from contentment to confusion, then to shock. "What is it?" Jae-hyuk asked, concern evident in his voice. Soo-jin looked up at him, her eyes wide. It's a message from my lawyer," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "They've uncovered new evidence. Something that could change everything." Jae-hyuk's brow furrowed. "What kind of evidence?" Soo-jin shook her head, still processing the information. "I'm not sure of all the details yet, but apparently, there's proof that my ex-husband's actions were part of a larger scheme. It wasn't just about humiliating me, there was a financial motive behind it." The implications of this new development hung heavy in the air between them. Just as Soo-jin had started to move forward, her past had come roaring back, demanding her attention. Jae-hyuk squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Whatever this is, we'll face it together," he said firmly. "This could be the key to finally putting this all behind you." Soo-jin nodded, drawing strength from his support. As they made their way back to her office to call her lawyer, she felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Fear of what this new evidence might reveal, hope that it could bring her case to a swift conclusion, and a newfound determination to see this through to the end. As she dialed her lawyer's number, Soo-jin caught Jae-hyuk's eye. He gave her an encouraging nod, and she felt a surge of gratitude for his unwavering support. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't have to face them alone. The phone rang, and Soo-jin took a deep breath, ready to confront the next chapter in her ongoing battle. As her lawyer's voice came through the line, she steeled herself for whatever revelations were to come, knowing that each new piece of information brought her one step closer to true freedom from her past. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Soo-jin. The new evidence her lawyer had uncovered opened up a Pandora's box of complications and revelations. As she sat in a conference room with her legal team and Jae-hyuk, the full scope of her ex-husband's actions began to come into focus. "So, let me get this straight," Soo-jin said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You're saying that Sungmin didn't just share those photos out of spite or revenge? That there was an actual financial motive behind it?" Her lawyer, Mr. Park, nodded gravely. "That's correct. We've uncovered a series of transactions that suggest your ex-husband was being paid to leak sensitive information about you and several other high-profile individuals. It appears to be part of a larger corporate espionage scheme." Soo-jin felt her head spin at the implications. What she had thought was a deeply personal betrayal had turned out to be part of something much larger and more sinister. Jae-hyuk, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. "How does this affect our case?" he asked. Mr. Park's expression was grim but determined. "It complicates things, but ultimately, it strengthens our position. This isn't just about invasion of privacy anymore. We're looking at potential criminal charges for Sungmin and his co-conspirators." As the meeting continued, Soo-jin found herself struggling to process the flood of information. The knowledge that her ex-husband's betrayal went beyond their personal relationship and into the realm of criminal activity was both shocking and, in a strange way, almost relieving. It provided a context for his actions that went beyond simple cruelty. After the meeting, Soo-jin found herself alone with Jae-hyuk in her office. She slumped into her chair, feeling overwhelmed. "How are you holding up?" Jae-hyuk asked gently, perching on the edge of her desk. Soo-jin let out a shaky laugh. "I don't even know," she admitted. "Part of me is relieved that there's more to the story than just Sung-min being vindictive. But another part, it's just so much to take in. I feel like I'm living in some kind of thriller novel." Jae-hyuk reached out, taking her hand in his. "I know it's a lot," he said. "But remember, you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." Just as Soo-jin was about to respond, her phone buzzed with a message. As she read it, the color drained from her face. "What is it?" Jae-hyuk asked, alarmed by her reaction. Soo-jin looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "It's from Sung-min," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He knows we've uncovered something. He's threatening to release more information if we don't back off." Jae-hyuk's expression hardened. "We need to tell the lawyers about this immediately," he said, reaching for his own phone. "This is blatant witness intimidation." As Jae-hyuk made the call, Soo-jin felt a wave of panic wash over her. Just when she thought she was making progress, just when she had started to open her heart to the possibility of a new relationship with Jae-hyuk, her past had come crashing back into her life with renewed force. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Police were called, statements were taken, and security measures were put in place to ensure Soo-jin's safety. Through it all, Jae-hyuk remained by her side, a steady presence in the chaos. As night fell and things finally began to calm down, Soo-jin found herself alone with Jae-hyuk once again. They sat side by side on the couch in her office, both exhausted from the day's events. "I'm sorry," Soo-jin said softly, breaking the silence. "I never meant to drag you into all of this." Jae-hyuk turned to her, his expression serious. "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "None of this is your fault. And I'm exactly where I want to be, by your side." His words warmed her heart, but Soo-jin couldn't shake the fear that had taken root. "But what if it gets worse?" she asked. "What if Sung-min follows through on his threats? I couldn't bear it if you got hurt because of me." Jae-hyuk reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "Soo-jin, listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "We're in this together. Whatever happens, whatever Sung-min or anyone else tries to do, we'll face it as a team. I'm not going anywhere." As she looked into his eyes, Soo-jin felt a surge of emotion. Despite the fear and uncertainty swirling around them, she felt anchored by Jae-hyuk's unwavering support. Slowly, she leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and fierce, a declaration of commitment in the face of adversity. When they parted, Soo-jin felt a renewed sense of determination. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now. "We'll face this together. No more running, no more hiding. It's time to fight back." Jae-hyuk smiled, a mix of pride and admiration in his eyes. "That's the Soo-jin I know," he said. Strong, resilient, unstoppable. As they left the office that night, hand in hand, Soo-jin knew that the road ahead would be challenging. Sung-min's threats loomed large, and the complexities of the case seemed to grow with each passing day. But for the first time, she truly believed she had the strength to see it through. With Jae-hyuk by her side and a newfound resolve in her heart, Soo-jin was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle was far from over, but she was no longer fighting alone. And that, she realized, made all the difference. The following weeks were a flurry of activity as Soo-jin, Jae-hyuk, and their legal team worked tirelessly to build their case and counter Sung-min's threats. The corporate espionage angle had opened up new avenues of investigation, and each day seemed to bring fresh revelations. One morning, as Soo-jin arrived at the office, she found Jae-hyuk waiting for her with a determined look on his face. "We need to talk," he said, ushering her into a private conference room. "The legal team has come up with a strategy, but I wanted to discuss it with you first." Soojin nodded, her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. What's the plan? Jae-hyuk took a deep breath before explaining. We think it's time to go on the offensive. Instead of just defending against Sungmin's actions, we want to expose the entire network behind this corporate espionage scheme. Soojin's eyes widened. But how? And wouldn't that be dangerous? It could be, Jae-hyuk admitted. But our investigators have uncovered links between Sungmin and several high-profile corporate players. If we can prove their involvement, it would not only strengthen our case, but also potentially bring down a major criminal operation. As Jae-hyuk laid out the details of the plan, Soojin felt a mix of emotions wash over her. The scope of what they were proposing was far beyond anything she had initially imagined. It was no longer just about her personal fight. They were on the verge of uncovering a major scandal. What do you think? Jae-hyuk asked, his eyes searching hers for a reaction. Soojin took a moment to collect her thoughts. It's overwhelming, she admitted. But if this could help prevent others from going through what I did, then I think we have to do it. Jae-hyuk smiled, reaching AC Ross the table to squeeze her hand. I was hoping you'd say that. Your strength continues to amaze me, Soojin. With their course of action decided, the next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Soojin found herself in endless meetings with lawyers, private investigators, and even discreet contacts within law enforcement. The web of deceit they were uncovering seemed to grow more complex by the hour. As the pressure mounted, Soojin was grateful for Jae-hyuk's unwavering support. He was there for every meeting, every late night, offering encouragement and strategic insight. Their relationship, though still new, was strengthened by the crucible of their shared mission. One evening, as they pored over documents in Jae-hyuk's office, Soojin felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were undertaking. Jae-hyuk, she said, her voice trembling slightly. What if this backfires? What if we're in over our heads? Jae-hyuk looked up from his papers, his expression serious, but compassionate. It's natural to be scared, Soojin. But remember why we're doing this. It's not just about you anymore. It's about exposing a corrupt system and protecting countless others who could be victimized. His words bolstered her resolve, and Soojin nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As their investigation progressed, it became clear that they would need to make their findings public to have the maximum impact. After much discussion with their legal team, they decided to approach a respected investigative journalist with their story. The day of the interview arrived, and Soojin found herself sitting across from a seasoned reporter, Jae-hyuk, by her side. As she began to recount her story, starting with the personal betrayal and expanding into the larger conspiracy they had uncovered, Soojin felt a strange sense of catharsis. It's not just about the photos anymore, she explained, her voice steady and clear. What we've uncovered is a systematic abuse of power and trust. Corporations and individuals exploiting personal information for financial gain, with no regard for the lives they're destroying in the process. The journalist listened intently, asking probing questions that Soojin answered with newfound confidence. As the interview concluded, the reporter looked at them both with a mix of admiration and determination. This is big, she said. Bigger than I think even you realize. Are you prepared for the storm this will create when it goes public? Soojin and Jae-hyuk exchanged a look, their hands finding each other under the table. We're ready, Soojin said firmly. It's time the truth came to light. As they left the interview, Soojin felt a curious mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had taken a huge step, one that would undoubtedly have far-reaching consequences. There's no going back now, Jae-hyuk said softly as they walked to the car. Soojin nodded, squeezing his hand. I know. But for the first time since this all began, I feel like we're truly fighting back. Whatever happens next, at least we're not hiding anymore. As they drove back to the office, both lost in thought about the challenges that lay ahead, Soojin's phone buzzed with a message. It was from the journalist. Story goes live tomorrow morning. Brace yourselves. And thank you for your courage. Soojin showed the message to Jae-hyuk, and they shared a look of nervous anticipation. The next 24 hours would change everything. But whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. The morning after the interview, Soojin woke up to a world that had fundamentally changed. The story had broken, and it was spreading like wildfire across news outlets and social media platforms. As she scrolled through her phone, she saw her name and face plastered across headlines, alongside words like whistleblower, corporate espionage, and scandal. A knock on her door startled her. It was Jae-hyuk, looking both excited and concerned. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as she let him in. Soojin took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. They made their way to the office, where a crisis management team was already assembled. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, emails, and strategy meetings. The story had exploded beyond their wildest expectations, with new victims coming forward and implicated companies scrambling to respond. As they worked, Soojin couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing, some piece of the puzzle they hadn't quite figured out. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that the final revelation came. Jae-hyuk burst into the conference room where Soojin was briefing their legal team. His face was pale, and he was clutching a stack of papers. "You need to see this," he said, his voice shaking slightly. As Soojin read through the documents, she felt the floor drop out from under her. The papers revealed a connection that none of them had seen coming, a direct link between Sungmin and Jae-hyuk's estranged brother. I had no idea," Jae-hyuk said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My brother, he was always the black sheep of the family. We hadn't spoken in years. I never imagined he could be involved in something like this." Soojin looked at Jae-hyuk, her mind reeling. "But why? Why would your brother be involved with Sungmin?" Jae-hyuk sank into a chair, his face a mask of shock and guilt. "It's my fault," he said. "Years ago, I caught my brother embezzling from our family's company. Instead of turning him in, I convinced our parents to cut him off. He must have turned to Sungmin's network out of desperation." The revelation hit Soojin like a physical blow. She had thought she was close to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy, but this personal connection to Jae-hyuk added a whole new layer of complexity. As they grappled with this new information, Soojin found herself facing a difficult decision. The connection to Jae-hyuk's brother could potentially undermine their credibility if it came to light. But hiding it would go against everything they had been fighting for. "We have to disclose this," Soojin said finally, her voice firm despite the turmoil in her heart. "We can't preach transparency and accountability while keeping secrets of our own." Jae-hyuk looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and fear. "You're right," he said. "But Soojin, this could change everything. People might question your motives, my involvement. It could jeopardize the entire case." Soojin reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I know. But we have to trust that the truth will prevail. We've come too far to compromise our integrity now." With heavy hearts but resolute determination, they called the journalist who had broken the story. As they explained the new development, Soojin could hear the shock in the reporter's voice. "This is unexpected," the journalist said. "But I appreciate your honesty. We'll need to run a follow-up story immediately." The next few days were a whirlwind of media appearances, legal depositions, and emotional conversations. Soojin found herself recounting her story again and again, each time delving deeper into the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to this point. Through it all, Jae-hyuk remained by her side, his support unwavering despite the personal cost to him and his family. Their relationship, tested by the fire of public scrutiny and personal revelations, emerged stronger than ever. As the dust began to settle, Soojin found herself sitting in a quiet corner of the office with Jae-hyuk, both of them exhausted but oddly at peace. "I never imagined it would end like this," Soojin said softly. "When this all started, I thought I was fighting a personal battle. I never dreamed it would lead to exposing a nationwide conspiracy." Yuk nodded, his hand finding hers. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said. "But Soojin, I want you to know how proud I am of you. Your strength, your integrity, you've inspired so many people." Soojin felt tears prick at her eyes. "We did this together," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." As they sat there, the weight of their journey settling around them, Sujin realized that she had come full circle. The woman who had once felt shattered by betrayal had emerged as a beacon of strength and integrity. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be trials, both literal and figurative. The full ramifications of their actions were yet to be seen. But as Sujin looked at Jae-hyuk, she felt a sense of hope and possibility that she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Whatever comes next," she said, squeezing Jae-hyuk's hand. "We'll face it together." Jae-hyuk smiled, pulling her close. "Together," he agreed. As they embraced, Sujin knew that this wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. She had reclaimed her story, exposed the truth, and in the process, found a love and strength she never knew she possessed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a fighter, and a woman who had discovered her own indomitable spirit.